I have had only like 2 or 3 people argue over my image, contact me stating that my image could not be a Joseph Smith and never have been the same anyone that's been like with a forensic background, although I do believe 2 of them are possibly the same person, who stated that my image just doesn't match their dimensions measurements of the death mask. So like the exact millimeter from the middle of the eye to the philtrum, or the nose to the philtrum, just things like that, measurements and things like that. And one of them that mentioned something like that was that Curtis Weber, he never gave a full analysis or said, I don't think it's Joseph Smith. He said it matches really well, but he was concerned about his exact measurements. And so how he came up with all this is he did Skulls and Crossbones, a forensic study of the remains of Joseph and Hiram Smith back in 2009 on the hills of the Scannell daguerreotype drama. And so in his study, which you can find here in Ensign Peak Foundation, but one thing he says is this study establishes a baseline of reliable biometric data pertaining to the appearance of Hiram and Joseph Smith that may be of interest to artists and other researchers, but further research will provide even more data. I have begun with Patrick Bishop to design a 3D study that will make use of all known relevant data and 3D modeling technologies. It is hoped that these findings of these studies will be of use in the analysis of purported photographs of Hiram and Joseph Smith, or the creation of accurate artistic depictions of these men. And so Weber uses measurements of the photos of the skulls, physical measurements of the death masks of Joseph and Hiram Smith. You can just kind of scroll up here and show you him actually, like he physically measured the death masks and everything. So here he's measuring the double death mask. But these are pedestal. He says that he really likes the pedestal death mask the most. And he's computer analyzing these measurements. So he's like hoping that these findings will be used in the analysis of purported photographs of Hiram and Joseph Smith to the creation of accurate artistic depictions. So he's just, this 1840 measurement is only 8 inches. So on me, I know I have a smaller head than Joseph Smith. He was like 6'4", and I have a small head for my own height. And it's 11 inches with measuring tape. So none of us can go back in time. There's no way to know that they use calipers, but I believe that they did. And a head is round, so if you move those calipers even a couple millimeters, like this is not a pinpoint spot like glabella, and neither is the Indian though. But so it's from the glabella to the Indian to the millimeter. He's based his conclusions like Joseph Smith would have to be obese for this exact millimeter measurement that he found from photos of the skulls and photos he took of the death mask and put in a computer. And you've got also, for comparison, we've got this study by Dr. Harrod, not Dr. Niles Harrod. You can look him up. He is a maxillofacial surgeon who wrote a report in 1995 that he believes skull 1 was actually Joseph Smith. So Curtis Weber said skull 1 can't be him unless he was severely obese. So I guess he's saying Hiram was severely obese, but we've heard that Joseph was fatter than Hiram. I don't know. Noting a decreased prominence of the left zygoma, which is evident in Joseph Smith's death mask, and most especially noting that although our LDS Hiram or skull 1, other studies, like Curtis studies, has like a broken maxilla, it doesn't show any signs of natural decay, but were crisp, free from debris, consistent with bone broken post-mortem. He believes from the exhumation process, which was a pretty rough process. They didn't just find these caskets and open them up carefully. It was just, there's no casket. They just found a piece of wood, then they hit bone with a shovel. So likely a shovel hit the skull and the maxilla was intact, but it was busted in like 1928. And so, but there's no evidence that it was broken 184 years ago, because there's no, like he was saying, he in this detailed report, he talks about how there are signs of natural decay everywhere else on the skull, but on the maxilla. And it's just how it is broken. He doesn't think it wouldn't be consistent with a bullet hole. How the bone broke. This is where he's saying the left zygoma, that's like your cheekbone, is left prominent than the right, and he sees that. That could be a healed zygomatic maxillary fracture. This, again, he is a maxillofacial surgeon. The left maxilla and nasal process of maxilla of the nose appear to be intact. An area which would have been injured had this been the skull of Hiram, since the death mask reveals a penetrating wound mid-lateral nose. Kent M. Van de Graaf, PhD, human anatomist, who says the same thing. He's also comparing the skulls to the death masks through the computer. He states, this is Curtis Weber, in March 2008, I met a sculptor, DJ Bodden, who shared with me unpublished forensic drawings he had created in 1995 in response to Tracy's first book. He concluded that Tracy had ignored basic principles of anatomy and arrived at the wrong conclusion, and that the 1920 identifications were indeed correct. So he's saying this was all Michael Tracy. They're not referencing these doctors, but this is a sculptor and a linguist that are criticizing these doctors in their method. They don't think they went to the right method. So after Tracy's second book was released in 2008, I carefully reviewed the evidence and arguments on the subject and determined that existing studies were deficient. Saying this is deficient. I had another person tell me these were sloppy, that this is sloppy. But they were calling Michael Tracy sloppy. And then a much more rigorous and scientific examination than had hitherto been attempted was not only both possible and warranted. This month I just designated, so that month in 2008, initiated a two-dimensional forensic study to attempt to settle the matter for myself, beginning with no commitment to either position in the controversy. I accepted the possibility that the results might be inconclusive. I worked on the study periodically from 2008 through May 2009 with the encouragement and assistance of many individuals, but they're not cited in the paper, so it's just him. He worked alone. The remainder of this article is a brief overview of the methodology, results, and conclusions of that study. And so I just think for a sculptor to accuse 4 doctors of ignoring basic facts, because there are more doctors than this, of anatomy and in a university. Someone in anthropology came to the same conclusion too. It wasn't just these 2 doctors. There were several more who did these studies. It discounts the possibility, though, of camera angle in this study by Curtis Weber and distortion, which when I was forwarded an email with Curtis Weber in late February 2018, in my hopes I wanted to get of my image getting analyzed through an MSI machine to check light markings on the paper. I saw my 1860s carte de visite, but he would only help me, this person I was referred to, if Curtis believed that my photograph was of Joseph Smith, or could be. That he sort of just couldn't believe my image matched the death mask because this measurement from like the philtrum to the middle of the eye, and that's exactly, Curtis said almost something exactly that in February 2018, but he didn't do a full analysis. He never sent me a full report, and I just kept asking, like, what angle was your camera lens? Because I knew that makes a huge difference when I looked at photos of the pedestal death mask that were used with the scanner daguerreotype were taken up higher, so his chin looks smaller. It really distorts those facial features, and they also cut off part of the chin. How they just really like photoshopped it out. They just cut it out really tight. But I knew the chin was bigger than that. He claims to have an exact 3D dimensional version of Joseph Smith's face from all the work that he did, which I'm sure he does have a 3D model. And so when all this happened, it was just mere months after I bought my carte de visite. And I didn't have a following. Most of my relatives and friends, relatives are mostly Southern Baptists, and just most people I know and friends and everything are just not really like members of the church or going very much. I mean, I am, but I just don't have a very big support system. So after this really negative email, something huge did happen to make me really believe that this was a photograph of Joseph Smith. And that me working on this and studying this, to not give up, that this was, I knew this was important. It's like just something happened, like this is important. I knew this was important to concerns I had of how he'd written his own paper and just how he thinks and how he plans to analyze things as numbers and measurements. And so like noting things like camera lens, what angles he took of it, the fact that he was studying a totally different death mask than the pedestal death mask. I've talked to forensic scientists and they do not do what Curtis does. So in a 2011 scientific study, there was a peer-reviewed, published paper by Elsevier conducted, written by Ruben Moreton and Johanna Morley, who work in forensics. It's titled Investigation into the Use of Photoanthropometry in Facial Image Comparison. So photoanthropometry is a metric-based facial image comparison technique. Measurements of the face are taken from an image using predetermined facial landmarks. Measurements are then converted to proportionality indices, PIs, and compared to PIs from another facial image. It is generally accepted that extrinsic factors, orientation of the head, camera angle, distance from the camera, can cause discrepancies in anthropometric measurements of the face from photographs. However, there has been limited empirical research into quantifying the influence of such variables. The aim of this study was to determine the reliability of photoanthropometric measurements between different images of the same individual taken with different angulations of the camera. So results show that the degree of variability in facial measurements of the same individual due to variations in camera angle can be as great as the variability of facial measurements between different individuals. Results suggest that photoanthropometric facial comparisons, as it is currently practiced, is unsuitable for elimination purposes. But I did speak to this woman who worked with the FBI in the United States. And this is exactly what she does. But there's usually photos, more than one photo of the same person. So she could not analyze my picture because there was only one photo of this person. And it's not already verified to be Joseph Smith. If there were verified photos of Joseph Smith, basically is what it is, you could do photoanthropometric studies. So she couldn't. But then this study is actually saying that process in and of itself, if there's even a slightly different camera angle, can produce totally different dimensions and measurements at a different angle. So it would just match. It would look like the dimensions of a different person. Curtis Weber's not in the field of forensics. I asked him in 2018. He spent a few years, is what he did, studying the craniofacial reconstruction on his own. I did tell him that I didn't agree with his skulls and crossbones study, having not read the above 4 references that I just showed you of those doctors. And clearly he's not been reading up on many forensic journals as of late, let alone with this article. And so I'm just going to show you this video where I'm just showing several different angles of the death mask. So they were taken by my friend with a cell phone of the double death mask of Joseph Smith, showing how if the photo is taken even slightly higher than on a flat plane to the death mask, the measurements of where the nose lands would match with someone with a longer nose than that person. Like Joseph Smith III has a longer nose than his dad does. taken from lower, because like you can hardly see his nostrils. It's just a different, the cartilage just does that. Taken from lower, the distance from the philtrum to the bottom of the nose would appear longer, depending on what angle you took the photo. When I went in March 2018, I realized why my friend had so much, who's so much taller than me, had all these photos that looked distorted, like she was just too close. And I was like, oh, could you not get back farther? And she was like, it's hard, until I went. And I'm like, yeah, it is. You'd have to have a ladder at the angle. Like it's almost sitting on a table, if that makes sense. So to be far enough away and get a flat plane with your lens to the plane of the death mask, you need a ladder. So it used to be flat against a wall, and people got really good photos back then, but all the photos I found online are from either from the right or the left. They're not right in front, because my picture is very right in front. So even comparing the double death mask to the pedestal death mask of Joseph Smith, the dimensions are not the same. From the camera we were used, the pedestal death mask, you can hardly see the lash line. Like no eyebrows. Just gonna pull this back and forth. The eyes look closer together on the pedestal death mask than on the double death mask. But you can see the chin lines up. And so his angle wasn't exactly the same with these. That's part of it. And the death masks themselves have different dimensions. So the pedestal, you can't see the lash line, you can't see the eyebrows, you can't even really see the nostrils. That's one that he's analyzing my picture from, not the double. I'm using the double death mask. And I read that when it was the other copies were taken out of the cast, that, you see a lot of them are really warped. This one's really, the pedestal one is damaged. You can really see damage on the nose, distortion on the lips in comparison to the dibble. So the dibble's the oldest, and they were very careful when they made that one. It was made in 1844. So it's the oldest one, and so the dibble, you can see the lash line. Whereas the pedestal, you don't see the lash line. You don't know where it goes. You don't know where the lash line ends. The eyes are very close together. The upper lip is really, really smashed. Like they really just smoothed things out. Whereas you see a lot more of the contours of the upper lip and lower lip. So I'm just going to do that one more time. Just pretty major differences between the two. And like swelling the eyes, things like that. So since then you'll see that I haven't analyzed my image by outlining the whole face and just trying to I'm analyzing individual features, like drawing the left eye, putting on the left eye of the death mask, outlining the right eye of my carte de visite and putting it on the right eye of the death mask. So I'm just really comparing directly just each facial feature to see the shape, and just in general, if they look the same, that's usually what they actually do, because the measurements don't work. And so what we're seeing here is the difference of camera lenses. So you could do a 3D model of it with the 16 millimeter, but every different lens you do, your 3D model is going to have totally different dimensions. And then it's very unlikely that he was able to get enough photos all around that were perfectly the same distance to not have distortion. So there's distortion from distance, distortion from camera, distortion from angle. So that's why they conclude here that they actually don't use those measurements. And people I've talked to, so these people said no. And then the people that are not these people said, we don't do this. We don't do what Curtis Weber does, or what I used to do before 2019 when I started comparing just individual features, because I was like, well, camera distortion is just so bad. And so I went and got my own photos, and I always say that in my video, like, it's distorted. And so when you look at this, you could try to say, well, your guy's forehead is too big compared to this, but this guy's own forehead is too big right there than it is there, you know? Because the camera, so my photo, it's like this. It's like the 16 millimeter because I could not get very far away at all. So it makes it look like that when you're too close, or the lens, or this and that. So they just don't do that. And so at this point, it marks 3 years since I contacted a well-known, accomplished forensic scientist. They recruited another person that knew had worked in it longer than them, actually. We Skyped in March 2019, and they'd studied. I've been talking. She'd seen it since December 2018, March 2019. It was a very in-depth analysis that they did. Told me what they thought. Again, I'm not going to try to quote them or imply, but they've written about it. They analyzed it now. That's 3 years. So knowing what they think and have written and are planning to get published soon, I haven't obviously gone, oh, it's not him, So nothing really to the point of what this person has said. They are definitely going to be very, very critical and unbiased and everything, and I'm not going to say what they say. They aren't going to say exactly what I say. To me, I really believe it's him, but when I think of everything that they have told me and everything that I have found out about the provenance, I still feel very, very hopeful. And then the other thing the person brought up, this was their first comment, is like, this photo is from the 1860s and J.S. Bibbins did not shoot Joseph Smith's picture because he was too young. So, J.S. Bibbins, in 1850, he was 28. Minus 6 years, he was 22. Well, this is Kendall County, Big Grove. So when I just think about these things, J.S. Bibbins in 1860 was working as a photographer. So I've got screenshots of that. So you had 1850, 1860 census. So 10 years later, he's now 38. He's an artist. And so he was old enough in 1844, but you've got Emma Smith's carte de visite, 1860s carte de visite. The paper looks similar to mine. Not exactly the same, but it's still, this is 1860s, this is 1860s. This is an oval, this is an oval. And so I got this studied in 2020. If you actually had followed me, you would remember that I protested against the idea that my picture, that even this image of Emma Smith was ever from a daguerreotype. I thought it was always a paper photo, until I saw her daguerreotype and was like, oh, they could copy a daguerreotype well. I thought it would look worse than this, but hers looks really clear, but her daguerreotype is oxidized really dark because they took it out of the case. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to see beyond. You wouldn't be able to see this part of her dress. You wouldn't be able to see around. If you look at a photo of Phoebe, Wilford Woodruff's wife, he wrote in his journal that he and Phoebe got their picture taken by Lucian Foster in Nauvoo. John Jack believes this was by Lucian Foster. And so when I met with Gawain Weaver, we looked at Lucian Foster's work. We compared the backgrounds, which are incredibly similar. I mean, it's very speckled. It's got a wave on there. You can tell this has sort of got a little bit of a wave, but it's this angle that this is draped, and it's uneven. It's slanted. And it's just like, that's just too similar. And Emma Smith went to Plano, Kendall County, Illinois, to visit her sons who lived there for 2 decades. We know that from the letters that she was planning to go in 1866. We know she did go and see David Hiram Smith, who lived there. Alexander lived there at one point. So they were all like 10 miles away from J.S. Bibbins. In Plano's a bigger city, Emma was always looking, she writes about looking for a photo car. And so you could imagine this would probably have his name. It probably would have been J.S. Bibbins. And she knew Elisha Bibbins, and she knew Elisha Bibbins had lived and died in that city. He was just as famous as her husband. He was a famous Methodist minister. Her husband was famous Latter-day Saint. But so seeing J.S., like the same initials of like her son and husband, J.S., and then Bibbins, Elisha Bibbins taught her in 1812. And so the Hale family, he knew the Hale family. So that's detailed down here. You can read about that. So she was physically in that town, so just 10 miles away. I think I imagine Bibbins could have gotten a photo car and gone the 10 miles from Newark to Plano to promote his business in the bigger city. But he definitely did have a studio, and so what Gowan Weaver saw was just the background didn't match. And the other things that he cite are like lack of sharpness, lack of detail, high contrast, loss of detail are the reasons that he thinks it was copy of an earlier photographic portrait, which I actually wasn't happy about because I was worried about it being flipped in orientation, because the right eyebrow matched the right eyebrow on the death mask. It wasn't flipped around, but it doesn't matter. He said he explained to me, so I didn't go in there begging for him to write this was copied from daguerreotype. So my old videos, you see, I'm protesting. My photo was always a paper photograph. It just was copied onto, or the negative, because they had negatives, even in 1844, for paper. And the paper photography existed, there were negatives. Could have been done. But it wasn't until his report that I believed that my picture could have been copied from a daguerreotype, because he knew more than me, you know? And so this person was just so mean online. I ended up deleting his comments because he's just like, that is hardly true. That can't be true. Da, da, da. And just, I know that things are happening, the wheels are turning, and I think I know what actually happened. I'm not going to say what happened. But I think word is possibly getting around that it's actually happening. So, but yeah, but these people that are writing about it, they think differently than I do and everything, but I know what they think. We've been talking for 3 years, you know. So my focus is always shifted to studying the artwork, studying this. It's just when you work with other people, it's best to do that. And it's just been a wonderful blessing. If nothing happens, I've learned so much because these people have been asking questions of things I didn't think needed to be figured out. And I thought we already knew everything that needed to be known, you know, and I've just figured all this stuff out. I found out about this. I got permission to put this on here. You can go here. And they wanted the link put on here. And this is the copy of the duplicate oil painting. But, oh my goodness, the similarities that I see between my images, just of minute, unique details. It's not like the best done painting. Just everything all together. It's incredible. This is really just incredible. So anyway, that's just all I have to say, and it's a lot, and I could say a whole lot more. Again, I went over just everything, and it took me 4 hours. So this person, most people have only been looking at my website for 2 minutes, which is a shame. But I've been working on this for 5 years. Please read every word, watch every video on my website, then comment. Okay? Have a good day.